Hello, and welcome to the Bitcoin Roundup podcast presented by Coinbits. We bring Bitcoin news, hot topics of conversation, and deep dives into a variety of Bitcoin topics to you weekly. We are Coinbits, a Bitcoin financial services company. Check us out at coinbits.app. This recording is for informational purposes only. No investment or legal or any other advice should be drawn from this content. And as always, consult an advisor before making any legal or financial decisions.
When did you start your show?
The podcast started in September of 2017.
Oh, wow.
And I got forced into it.
Forced.
But yeah, I met a friend of mine, Lewis. He worked at Barstool. And he was pumping Ethereum on Twitter. And I DM'd him. I was like, hey, I'm a fan of Barstool. I really like what you guys are doing, but I don't think you should be pumping Ethereum. I write a newsletter. I was writing the newsletter at the time the podcast didn't exist. And I was like, hey, I'm not trying to be like pushy, but like, really don't think it's a good look for Barstool to be pushing like Ethereum
Tone it down, bro.
on people. He's like, all right, like I'll hear you out. Let's meet up for drinks. I'd like to know more about why you think this, and met up with him in Flatiron in New York, and we had drinks, and I just explained to him like, hey, I've been around this and I think I have a lay of the land. Like, here's my perspective. And by the end of the conversation, he was like, all right, I think you're not bullshitting me. I've read your newsletter. I think you should start a podcast. And I was like, I don't know how to do that. Can you help me? And he was like, yeah. 3 months later, we started the podcast.
That's awesome, man. So actually, that's right around that same time the idea for Coinbits was born, September 2017. Like, people liken us like the acorns for Bitcoin, but like I had no idea what acorns was. I want to give a shout out to like my inspiration. It was an app called Coin Flash. It was a flash in the pan. I think it lasted like 2 or 3 months, and the project died. I'm like, man, I love this idea, this like roundup, into Bitcoin thing. And I want to like continue to carry the torch. I reached out to the guy a couple of times, but never got a response back. So yeah, September 2017 was my date too.
Things are popping off then.
Yeah. That was right around the time like Coinbase was like, the easy way to get into Bitcoin for a lot of people, right? Other than that, you had exchanges, but they were just like starting to roll out a bunch of shit coins. There was like the Coinbase pump.
No, that was like, and people are really even, it's crazy to think it was only 5 years ago now at this point, almost 5 years, a month away from 5 years. But I think it was like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Litecoin that they had on Coinbase.
Yes, more came out.
Yeah, later that like Bcash was like the 4th coin they added, I remember. And then
I remember Charlie Lee selling the top.
on CNBC. He went on with Brian Kelly on CNBC. He was like, yeah, I sold all my Litecoin. And I was like, I'm out.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of which, you have an $800 tie. Tell us about that.
An $800 tie that I'm very happy to own.
That's awesome. That's a nice tie.
Shout out to Dread for putting it up for auction.
Yes.
Was
I bet Dread today, man. He's awesome, dude.
Was in a bidding war for the tie. Wound up winning the bidding war. And the proceeds get a hot on that, which is, it's an $800 tie, but more importantly, it's a $800 contribution to
to
Huddle campaign.
Absolutely.
Shout out.
I like good ties. It's a nice tie.
Yeah, it's really.
I think it's better than Draper's tie. Draper's tie is a little corny. This one's like a little bit more refined. So
Yeah, Waste was saying earlier, it's cool how the Hollow Knot thing just picked up a couple weeks ago, and there's stuff everywhere. I mean, like banners.
It's been going on for years.
Yeah, no, I know, but just in the last couple of weeks, yeah. Nobody rallies like Bitcoiners.
yeah, no. Well, like with Hollow Knot specifically, he's been a bit
Reserved, right?
he hasn't been seeking out help.
I think he just came out and seeked out help. Yeah.
That's the thing. Like Matt will tell you, Matt Odell will tell you, like he was very ardent about not seeking out help. And there's a few Bitcoiners who are like, all right, we've seen how much he's got to pay to fight this legal battle. And so like, we should help him out. That's what tonight's all about. It's been fun.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a ton of fun, man.
Yeah.
Tell us about 1031.
1031. Yeah. So we're a venture capitalist fund, fully focused on investing capital in Bitcoin infrastructure, whether that be people building things like exchanges or working on things at the protocol level or Lightning. We're a fund filled with Bitcoin maximalists who are really ardent in our belief that Bitcoin is the next reserve currency of the world. And we feel that there has been a lack of dedicated investment funds towards the Bitcoin at an infrastructure level and an application layer above that. And
That totally resonates with me. Actually, a couple of years back, I've been in the boardroom, right? I've taken on VC money. I'm very familiar with that process. And we made a conscious decision not to take on VC money because, there's less strings attached that come with money. And so to see a change in the Bitcoin ecosystem to like take on, to be like for Bitcoiners and Bitcoin maximalists to be VCs, there's a new thing. So I'm excited to see how that pans out over the next couple of years.
yeah, we are as well. And with that being said, we do have strings attached with the money that we
I'm a
give.
traditional VC, right?
Yeah, no. And I want to be clear, we do have strings attached with the money that we give people. And it's that like, you better be pushing Bitcoin and a Bitcoin standard.
But those are the rights.
As hard as you can. No, it's interesting because I never fancied myself a VC. I mean, I worked in the hedge fund space out of college, not really VC focused, but more commodities markets focused, and learned early on like the importance of like risk aversion when you're allocating capital. And then after working at the managed futures fund, observing the tech sector and the VC landscape in Silicon Valley over the last decade, particularly like these big Silicon Valley unicorns like Uber and Slack and LinkedIn, and really just always had like a intuition that there was like a lot of money being wasted on these companies where you're just like really just trying to raise money to pump your valuation and then spend money on the back end to make it look like you're actually doing something. And what I think has happened is like nothing material has actually been brought to market from these products. Yeah, there's been the cool things with like these tech startups, but with Bitcoin, why I'm very excited and why I felt comfortable enough to join 1031 is like people building on Bitcoin are building on literally the most impactful innovation that has been introduced to humanity. And it's, you could say a century, I would argue millennia. Like fixing the money is the biggest thing we can do. It's the biggest goal that we have to fix right now, because as somebody likes to fancy himself who understands some of the ills that are wrought by the fiat monetary system, like when it comes to like politics and stuff like that, people bickering between each other, like it's left, it's right, it's left, it's right. But it's really the money at the end of the day. Nobody focuses on that. And so finding companies and people that are building in the space that understand that, hey, the money's broken. We need to fix the money. And to fix the money, we need to build on this protocol called Bitcoin. And we need to make it accessible and allow people to use it easily. And once that happens, they'll get better money. Once you get better money into the economy, you have positive externalities that begin rippling out, because people can save, people can spend without fear of being censored by a payment processor or something like that. And so a long-winded answer to what is 1031 is a venture fund dedicated to supporting people that, number one, believe that we need to fix the money. Number two, have the capability to like build the utility on top of the protocol that gives more people access.
I remember when you made the announcement, you got a ton of heat on Twitter for doxing yourself. That was,
so I didn't dox myself with 1031. I doxed myself with Cathedra. I joined the board of a publicly traded company.
That's right.
You have to use your real name on those, apparently.
So yeah, I mean, you just talked about how the Silicon Valley, fundraising culture was about like sort of pumping up the valuation just for the next round of funding. What do you see potentially different with Bitcoiner, not Bitcoin, Bitcoiner focused or, VC fund?
Well, it really changes where it shifts from a valuable company is viewed in the typical Silicon Valley fiat money VC structure. Like a good company is viewed on just like user acquisition and growth and not necessarily profitability on the back end, where under a Bitcoin standard as a Bitcoin VC, we invest in companies that are literally living under a Bitcoin standard. And not every company, but a lot of the companies we invest in like live in a Bitcoin standard. They use Bitcoin, they make revenue off of Bitcoin. And so we have a long-term 5, 10, 15-year thesis that the world is going to shift to a Bitcoin standard. And we try to operate our allocation strategy thinking about that future when we're living under a Bitcoin standard. And once you're under a Bitcoin standard, it's completely different than the environment we find ourselves in now with the fiat system, where you can just have the Fed print a bunch of money. VCs can go raise money from people who have access to the Fed window. They're looking to get a yield on that money, and they like go invest in early stage startups, hoping that they'll get 1 in 10 unicorns that can go public and then you can cash out. Where under Bitcoin standard, that is not as tenable, where you actually need somebody to provide value.
Yeah,
if
like
you're
the spray and pray model isn't.
no, because there's a lot of opportunity cost with spending Bitcoin,
Absolutely.
especially if you're in like this monetization phase where it's like, all right, I give you Bitcoin now. Can you produce more Bitcoin than I gave you? And honestly, like 90 out of 100 instances, the answer is no. So you have to determine whether or not the individuals starting the company that you're investing in have the mindset of like, all right, we're not just trying to like do a growth stage startup in the traditional sense. We're thinking about adding value and productivity to the environment, where what we really focus on is the concept called sats flows, where we really want the companies that we're investing in to focus on building a Bitcoin treasury. And not only that, beginning to transition into a circular economy where they figure out they're not just like making fiat and then buying Bitcoin, holding it on the balance sheet. They're like, how do you use Bitcoin as a stack at the protocol layer, second layer, whether it be Lightning, Liquid, whatever, to provide utility to the market to then drive sats back to your balance sheet.
It's interesting because you were saying about how the opportunity cost is holding while Bitcoin monetizes, but it almost sounds like one of the kind of evaluation criteria is like, does this company actually help that happen? Like you need to actually push that forward. You use the Bitcoin to cause the Bitcoin to monetize, and then you reap the rewards.
We talk about that all the time, right? Like we're the ones that are going to make Bitcoin happen, right? So we're not going to just sit around.
No, I mean, again, this is I don't know if it's a chicken and egg problem, but it's like, if not me, then who problem?
Right.
If you just look at Bitcoin statically on a piece of paper, on the white paper, when it was first released and you could read all the code, it's like, all right, we have this system that releases at the time of Genesis block, 50 Bitcoin per block. You need to hit this difficulty target to add a block to the blockchain. We'll have a difficulty adjustment every 2016 blocks. We'll have a halving every 210,000 blocks. Like, you have those rules in place and then you can build around it, but you have to build utility around it too. Like, you can buy and hold Bitcoin, which I don't denigrate at all, but if it's going to become like the currency, then we need to, on top of that inherent utility that the protocol provides with the security and the distributed nature of like, there only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. And if you create a private public key pair and you have access to the private key, you'll have access to that Bitcoin. On top of that, it's like, all right, like, what can you do with the Bitcoin? And
we had a space. We host a space every Thursday night, 8 p.m. We'd love to have you join us if you could one time. But we had a space a couple of weeks ago. I think it was about the Bitcoin maximalism one, where what's her name? Yeah. She was talking about this concept of, what does VC world look like under Bitcoin standard? And she made a strong point that like, it is hard to get people to part with their Bitcoins. And what you just said now resonated with that idea that when you're operating under Bitcoin standard, that opportunity cost of losing that Bitcoin because you fund the wrong thing matters so much more that you can't just spray and pray there.
Absolutely. Well, there's also a question with you, Marty, like on your LPs, are they aligned with that same strategy? Like, how do you guys vet, the money that comes into the fund?
yeah, I mean, I like to think it's part of the selling point of 1031 is we're very, like, we wear hard on our sleeves. We're like, hey, like, if you're investing money in 1031, like, this is, like, we're not shy about it. Like, we're not like, just give us money, get your return on the back end. And we're very like, hey, when you give us money, like, we want you to understand, like, we believe that the world is going to hyper Bitcoinize. We believe Bitcoin's going to be the next reserve currency of the world. We don't believe in shitcoins, and we think that's all noise. We actually call our funds low time preference funds because we try to instill in our LPs that join us, like, hey, this is not a quick 10x or anything like that. Like, we're in this for the long haul, and what we're trying to do is actually really, I don't want to
sound like it, dude.
I mean, we're trying to like change the world. It takes time. Like, we're not like your typical A16Z, like, give us a bunch of money, we'll pump it in ICO, it'll 10x and we'll return you 10x like in 2 years. I mean,
dude, that's incredibly reassuring as a founder, man. And like, because like we bootstrapped Coinbits for the first couple of years, and even, we raised some like friends and family, angel investing type thing, but we're really hesitant about the whole like traditional VC route. But it's incredibly encouraging hearing you speak on behalf of 1031, man.
Yeah, well, yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. And again, it's a contrarian play. I mean, I know the whole, we're getting kicked out of Bitblockboom. We're talking too hard here. But
A16Z call.
yeah. You gotta get the hell out of here. So the whole concept of contrarian play is sort of outplayed where everybody's like, yeah, I'm contrarian. But I truly do believe that lowering your time preference and choosing to invest in Bitcoin companies instead of falling prey to the siren calls like ICOs and DeFi and all that shit is the right long-term play, because at the end of the day, you're building a base layer infrastructure for the future economy, which is not materialized. Right? Everybody's still living in the fiat world, and myself included, where like nobody's, if we're being honest, even 13 years in, like the penetration of Bitcoin adoption is very minuscule. We gotta go.
Marty, we'll continue this another night, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, brother.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Bitcoin Roundup podcast presented by Coinbits. So what do you think of the conversation? Share your thoughts with us on Twitter @CoinbitsApp, and be sure to subscribe to be notified of our next episode release. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time on the Bitcoin Roundup podcast.